Lynched on CTV, proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88 at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled. Good evening. He's not on the council, but he's still got plenty to say. With a fairly new council that swings more his way, is Garry more impressed? The former Christchurch mayor joins me, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening, thanks so much for your company. Well, rate rises, asset sales, the cost-sharing agreements, there's never been a more important time in Christchurch's history to take an active interest in the city's future, given the issues we all face living here. Well, one man who may be out of council, but he's still got an opinion on just about everything, is former Christchurch Mayor Garry Moore. He joins me. Good evening to you, sir.
Hi, Chris.
Well, let's start with one opinion I'm sure you've got, and that is the convention centre. The big announcement last week of this grandiose, massive-looking thing. My initial thoughts on it was, we don't need it. It's a ratepayer burden, but the private sector has stepped up. You must be happy about this, Garry Moore.
Not at all.
Why not?
Because I think a convention centre is last century's thinking. I think that when I was on the council, we had a $20 million convention centre and we struggled to make it pay. We've sold our soul to the devil in Auckland, and the casino will build a beautiful convention centre. There's going to be one in Wellington and there's going to be two in Queenstown. For a country of 5 million people, how many convention centres do we need? And convention centres create low-paid jobs, they're casual jobs, and I think they're out of date.
Garry Moore, what do you say to those who say, build it and they will come? That argument we've heard time and time again from not the economists, mind you, the private enterprise businessmen who say that.
It'll take, in my opinion, 30 years to rebuild the middle of the city. And I can't see conventions being attracted to a bomb site, and so a big bomb site. But I think that...
Are you being unkind though, and sorry to interrupt, but are you being a little bit unkind because at the end of the day, if we do have something that says we're investing in Christchurch from a government point of view, from some of the local investors that have decided to stump up the money, won't that potentially show the rest of the international investing world that we are eventually open for business? Do you buy that argument?
No. I think that if I applaud the government putting $258 million into our city. I think that's good, but I'd like to see the benefit-cost ratio of that project. I would have looked, for instance, at, say, how do we add value to food and fibre production in Canterbury, which is growing at a huge rate, and I would have been using the government departments that we've got, you know, research departments, the universities, the research organisations. I would have been looking at IT and how could we grow that. I would have been looking at the 21st century economy rather than the old economy.
Are you nervous that we won't be able to fill this convention centre? Will we have too much capacity in New Zealand as it is, with Auckland, Wellington and Queenstown, and now Christchurch?
I just don't think it'll work, and this is a public policy debate, and I'd like to see how different items were measured against each other and we arrived at a $258 million convention centre, because, you know, people say, well, it's not coming off our rates, but we're also taxpayers. And if we want taxes to be working in an effective way, growing an economy that is futuristic, we shouldn't be investing in a convention centre.
You see, I was initially against the convention centre, as many people know, and I was called anti-progress. Could the same argument be made for you now, knowing that at least the government's putting its money where its mouth is?
Oh, I'd say the convention centre's the equivalent of sort of backing into the future, looking at the rear vision mirror. It's just old technology. I think we've got the capacity right now to actually have conventions. We could base it at Wigram or places like that. We might spend 20 or 30 million on something like that, but not 258 million. And around the world, they don't pay. And so I just think, I want to grow our economy. I want people your age to see that it is worthwhile staying here to a place where there are high wages, where people can feel that they can grow their family, and it's a wonderful place to live. I can
almost hear the government saying, though, Garry Moore, this was all part of the Share an Idea project. This is what Cantabs wanted.
Yeah,
and you say?
That doesn't necessarily make it right. You know, you've got to apply alongside a wish list some applied disciplines of how you're going to measure what's the most effective expenditure of funding.
Tim Hunter says this is going to be great for the city. This is going to be the boost the local economy has always wanted. I'm guessing you're not convinced because he has something else to.
Yeah, I mean, Tim Hunter's justifying his job. Personally, I think it's time Canterbury and tourism was part of the Canterbury Development Corporation. I think it's time to restructure a whole lot of those things. And no, I'm not impressed by that at all. I mean, I've sat on all those bodies, so I know what drives them. But
there's been no business case, has there?
I don't know. I haven't seen it. I'm just asking for it. If I'm wrong, I'll stand up and say I'm wrong. But I just think that one of my criticisms, and I've given it many times, one of my criticisms of the Central City, the 100-day plan, it was a political imperative, not a planning imperative. In other words,
I'm going to play devil's advocate with you, because the government would say we had to lock off the Central City for safety reasons. There are still buildings that need to come down.
Yeah,
is that a fair comment, or is that rubbish?
No, they pulled far too many down. And in fact, a whole lot of the buildings that were pulled down was selling out to the insurance companies. I know, but that's spilt milk. I mean, it's time to move on from that. But no, I think that the group of people that captured the planning process were my generation. And I think that they were looking backwards, not forwards. And I'm very critical of a lot of what they said, but I'm not saying anything different here from what I've said before.
My understanding, and I might be wrong about this, and people can challenge me this on the radio, but my understanding was before the earthquake, the convention centre was struggling as it was. It was struggling to attract conventions. We're now about to build something a lot bigger in a city that, as you say, is an embarrassment, because there is none.
Well, it'll take a long time for the city to resurface in a new form. I don't think that the convention centre was about to be expanded, but in fact, alongside the convention centre, there were a number of facilities that had that sustained it, but they've gone, and this great big $500 million blancmange that sort of looks like a failed blancmange.
It does, doesn't it? It looks like it's seeping in. We're going to take a break, but I want to pick you up on the blancmange after the break. We'll discuss that and asset sales and rate rises. Are they only really the two options we face in the city? Stay with us. Well, welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Garry Moore. Garry, in terms of this cost-sharing agreement, what do you make of it?
I think that it needs to be reviewed. I think that the council have acted in a superb way in putting all of their reports in front of us for us to look at. And I think that the cost-sharing agreement, which was done behind closed doors by one or two people, like Tony Marriott and Bob Parker, and I think that it's time to go back and have a look at those. The
Well, it is a living document, isn't it, as what Leanne Dalzell was saying, which to me indicates there is flexibility to change it. I was quite surprised when I had Gerry Brownlee on News Talk ZB last week. He did say they will review the cost-sharing agreement in December, but why not now?
Oh, it needs to be done now, and now's a perfect time to discuss it because of the election in 6 weeks' time, because this is the point when politicians actually are being tested. Their ideas are tested. That's what an election's about. I think the people of Christchurch need to know that I went and checked this out recently because I was interested. The cost-sharing agreement put $1.9 billion worth of costs onto the ratepayers of Christchurch. And it's got, when you look at it, it's got things like, I think it's $247 million for the stadium, and 30-something million for the government. And the government's managing the project. I mean, it's weird. That obviously has to go. But in fact, I think a lot of the infrastructure has to be looked at as well. The expenditure on infrastructure is just over $1 billion. And I think that people in Christchurch would be surprised if they knew that, for instance, a lot of the sort of ups and downs and the roads and all that sort of thing are not going to be replaced. And so there's...
What do you mean by that?
Just my reading of cabinet papers and financial papers that are all available on websites. So it's not, I'm not privy to any conversation. In fact, I know what most people know because I read it in the paper, or I've gone and looked behind the scenes a bit in official papers. But I think what worries me is I think that there was haste. That was one thing, and you never make good decisions in haste. And the second thing is the council has a long-term council community plan, so it's a 10-year plan. A lot of that stuff will have been put in the plan in my time. And remembering I left when I left as mayor, we're in a net debt-free position. And you look at, I'll give an example. A lot of people were disturbed when down Memorial Avenue the gutters were replaced, because that will have fought its way through the long-term council plan and it had finally got to the top of the pile. It was totally unnecessary after the earthquake. And I think what's happened is the council needed to actually have a hard look at its long-term plan, and the government needed to have a hard look at what was being replaced and what wasn't. Are you
suggesting there's still a disconnect? Do you think that disconnect is closed now that we have a new council?
I think we're very lucky. We've got a very good council at the moment. The horsepower around the table is quite impressive. I think it was quite interesting. The Court of Mentha, now look, I haven't even read the Court of Mentha report, but the guy that led that, and I can't even remember his name, Stiasny or something?
Michael Stiasny.
I don't know him. Never met him, never set eyes on him. But he put some numbers out, and Gerry Brownlee immediately challenged those numbers.
Correct. And do you find it weird that we will never ever see the light of day of this Morrison Lowe report that Gerry Brownlee said, we need to do this, the council's got its figures wrong. All of a sudden, we're not seeing the report that he was so into and so angry with the Court of Mentha report. That seemed a little bit disingenuous, didn't it? Not to release it now.
I think that the report will come out, and I think it will show that Court of Mentha report was probably correct. And I think that we will find that Gerry Brownlee, the fact that he hasn't released that report says that it's actually said to him, you were wrong. But that's what worries me about these reports, that there's a disconnect. And I'd like to say, I don't think we should hang as ratepayers on the $1.9 billion until we've actually had a hard look at what made up those numbers. And that, to me, is the challenge. And the debate that's happening at the moment, Chris, is very healthy. I
agree with you.
It.
The debate, though, it does not necessarily just centre around asset sales or rate rises, does it? The debate could also centre around what we need to pare back and what the government's contribution should be when it comes to the cost-sharing agreement. But Nikki Wagner on News Talk ZB told me that when I said to her, look, perhaps it's better for the government to ditch the $30 million allocated for the playground. Perhaps it's better they redirect some of their Avon River precinct money towards the council. She said this is set in stone, we're not changing a thing. This is what the people wanted. But surely the government should change its logic now that we know the Cameron report says we're facing a $900 million shortfall.
Yeah, we all have to change. And we all have, what we expected from the past, we all have to go back to the drawing board and say, actually, we can't afford that. And like, for instance, my observation from outside, and again, no science involved, I'd say that the council is crassly overstaffed. I would be looking...
Now, how do you make that analogy? That's interesting, because I thought they were trying to pare back, you know, they employed a new CEO who was on a lot less money than Tony Marriott. Are things improving? You're saying to me the council's still too bloated?
Oh, absolutely. But the new chief...
By who? By who? Middle managers on over 100?
By Tony Marriott, who lived in a splendid isolation on an island. I think that the council... at the end of the day, you can only use a blunt instrument to actually to pare back excess costs.
I want to pick you up on that in council. It's a very important subject. We'll discuss the council and how much fat there is still inside Hereford Street next. Stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Garry Moore. Garry, you were saying earlier before the break that you still believe there's too much fat inside council.
Yes, I think the council sort of grew and grew and grew, and it took over a lot of functions that I don't think it needed to.
Like what?
Well, for instance, the council's got more reporters than the press. That's just one statistic, you know.
You mean communication staff?
Oh, absolutely. But they're reporters, most of them.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, there's engineering everywhere, and I'm not saying that they're all doing a bad job. What I'm saying is that at the moment we've got to look through the costing of it. And the new chief executive who's just arrived, there will be enormous institutional resistance against any change because it's been a splendid island for a few years. And
I'm humbled with her response, because I asked her about whether there was too much fat inside council, and she said to me she believed there was, and she was surprised that every report, council report, goes through 15 pairs of hands at a cost of $500. She said it's that kind of culture that needs to change.
Oh, yes,
it's good to hear, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it's good to bring somebody in totally from the outside. But I just think we just need to have the debate, and we need to actually enter into the debate with an open mind. And I think that the council, look, what happened after the earthquake is a whole lot of institutions became self-serving. So you had, for instance, the Anglican Church, or you had the City Council, you had all these institutions that were very focused on themselves. One of the few that I thought was really superb was the District Health Board, which looked outwards, and it did a really, really good job. And so during that time of insular thinking, you will find there will be a lot of padding there, and people will be very defensive about it.
Do you think there's a lot of padding still then at Sarah?
Yes, there will be.
Because that's Leanne Dalzell's bugbear. She's perhaps more diplomatic in what she says now, but I do believe that her and Raf have said on many times there's far too much duplication.
Yeah,
so how do you get rid of that then?
I remember David Longy once saying, a good hanging clears the mind. And I think...
Come on, Lynch then.
and I do think, for all the best intentions in the world, economic reality is in front of us, you know. Do not adjust your mind, reality may be at fault. And what we have to do is, as a city and as a country, we actually have to look at, there's still people out there with their houses not fixed. There's still people, suspensions of their cars falling apart. There's still people feeling hurt. And we as a community have a collective responsibility to make sure that whatever funds are available, and they're always scarce, go to the people that need it and the facilities and structures that need it.
Let's talk about one way the council wants to make more funds available, and that is selling down $400 million worth of its partial assets. What do you make of this?
Again, you know, I know Rob Cameron. Rob Cameron's a corporate asset stripper.
The author of the Cameron report, let's be clear about this.
Yes, yep. And I haven't read the report yet, but I must print off the 80-something pages or 90
I had
pages.
a go at it, but just read the conclusion.
I'm a tragic accountant, you see. I enjoy that sort of
tragic
nonsense.
accountant.
And I think that it is a good time to have a look at our assets. I've always been strongly defensive of us owning our airport, our seaport and our data port.
That surprises me, actually.
Oh, no.
I would have thought you wanted to save everything.
No, well, those three in Orion I've always said were fundamentally important, because those organisations, the private sector and the public sector, trade on the top of them. They are publicly owned assets.
So you're okay with a bit of selling off things if we need more money? I mean, Raf says that money is better spent on fixing roads and gutters. Is that a point?
I mean, I don't know what Raf's privy to, but I was always, as a mayor, I was in favour of selling City Care and the Red Bus. I couldn't see any sense in owning either of them.
But even if we sell those, they're not cash cows. So would that really make much of a difference, though?
Look, you know, when you've got a financial crisis, it's like a family. When you've got a financial crisis in your family, you put your top priority to your bottom priority, and you put your budget alongside it. And some of your bottom priorities you can't do immediately, and that's exactly what we have to do as a city. But what I'm applauding the council for is actually putting their papers on the table for us all to look at, for us all to read, and we must do it. I haven't seen a more engaged debate on finances in the city ever.
Well, it's incredibly important, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and I think that the government's got to come to the table and say, right, the 1.9 billion's on the table as well, and we need to actually work on it together.
They will, though. It's election year, won't they?
Well, in fact, all the parties should be paying attention to it, and we should be asking them all, what's your view on the 1.9 billion? Because unfortunately, I think a big part of the problem has been the personality of Jerry Brownlee. I think he's a bulldozer in his style, and Jerry, personally, I think is past his use-by date for our city. And
why do you say that? Because it's a strong thing to say.
Yeah, it is, because I think we need a more collaborative style. We need a more inclusive style. And like, for instance, the way Raf and Leanne have been putting the papers on the table, we need to have government people doing exactly the same.
If you were John Key and you had the power to decide on your own earthquake recovery minister, inside National, who would it be then?
First of all, I wouldn't. I think the Westminster system of SERA is wrong, and I think it needs to have a board. And I'd put on the board, I'd have it chaired by somebody like Mark Cooper, who was the Royal Commissioner, who did a superb job. And you have somebody above the fray, and you put good people around a table to manage the the sort of very things we're talking about need to have all sectors together, working together, and that's what I look forward to after the election.
We've got 20 seconds left. Are you feeling confident after the election? Do you think much will change?
I think that the government, regardless of who is the government will have to change the way they run SERA, and that is our challenge. And the $1.9 billion that they've left with the city has to be on the table for us all to debate and discuss and see what's important.
We're out of time, Garry Moore. Appreciate your time. Nice to speak with you. Very interesting. And that is our show. To comment on tonight's program, share your views on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Lynched. But from me and all the CTV team, good night. Lynched on CTV was proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88, at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled.